If your foundation technically matches, but your client still looks off, this is why. So right here, I'm starting with a shade that actually matches her complexion, but I already know this isn't going to fully support her skin. And this is where a lot of makeup artists stop, because on first glance, this looks correct. The depth is close, the tone isn't completely off, but what's missing is the response from the skin. It's not reflecting the same warmth, enhancing her natural tone, and it's actually just sitting on top of her skin versus melting into her skin. Her skin has a natural golden warmth, and that formula wasn't giving enough of that, so it starts to look flat. And this is the difference between matching the skin and supporting the skin, because foundation isn't just color. There's undertone to consider, saturation, and even how the formula interacts with light. If the undertone is slightly off, even if the depth is right, the skin won't look as radiant. And if the formula doesn't have the right luminosity, it won't reflect the natural dimension of her complexion. So instead of trying to fix this later on with powder, I'm going to correct it at the base level. And this is where most people get a little tripped up. They try to adjust the finish instead of adjusting the foundation itself. Now, as I started to introduce that other shade with more warmth and slightly deeper depth, you can just see immediately how the skin is starting to respond differently. It looks more alive, it blends into her neck more naturally, and there's more harmony. It's not just matching, it's aligning with her undertone. If you compare this side to the first application, the first one sits on the skin and this one just melts into it. And that's the difference it really comes down to with undertone and luminosity, not just shade. This is why so many bases feel like they're almost right, but they never fully come together, because the issue isn't always the match. It's more so about the balance. Now that the base is balanced, I'm moving into blush, and this is where placement and tone really start working together. She told me her blush is usually placed right on the apples of her cheek, and it usually makes her feel like she has a fuller face. And while that placement isn't wrong, on her face, it actually emphasizes the roundness instead of giving it a lift, which I think is what she was trying to articulate to me. So instead, I placed her blush higher, more along the upper cheek, and diffused it towards her temples. This shifts the structure and gives her a more lifted, elongated look. And color-wise, I'm just choosing something that complements her golden undertone. So instead of a cooler pink, I leaned more into a warmer tone with a bit more vibrancy. And that keeps the skin looking radiant instead of dull or disconnected from the base. Because even if the placement is correct, if the tone is off, it can still throw off the entire complexion. And notice how the color just melts into her skin instead of sitting on top of it. That's when you know the undertone is working. So again, it's not just placement. It's placement and undertone working together. Now I'm going in with a cream bronzer, and this is where I start to add structure back into the face. I'm not just placing this randomly. I'm focusing on areas where I want a little more definition, like along the perimeter and around, well, under the cheekbone. And tone-wise, I'm being really intentional here. I'm choosing a bronzer that still complements her undertone, something that adds warmth but doesn't pull too red or too cool against her skin. Because if the tone is off here, it can start to compete with everything we just did in the blush and the base. So I'm placing it strategically to create soft dimension, not harsh contour, just enough to give some shape and balance. And instead of leaving it dense, I'm blending it out with a damp sponge to diffuse the edges and keep everything very seamless. That way, the structure looked like it's coming from within the skin and not sitting on top of it. You can see how this starts to frame the face a little more, especially along the cheek and jawline, without making it look heavy. So again, it's not just about adding depth. It's about adding the right depth and the right tone in the right placement. Now I'm going in with concealer, and this step is really about refining the complexion, not overpowering it. I'm not trying to get too light here. I want to brighten, but still stay within a tone that makes sense for her overall complexion. Because when concealer is too light or too cool, it can start to look disconnected from the rest of the face. So I'm placing this in areas where I naturally want light. So underneath the eyes, a bit through the center, just to bring focus and dimension back to the face. And as I'm blending, I'm being really intentional about keeping the product concentrated where I placed it. I'm not dragging it too far or out because I still want that structure from the bronzer and blush to remain intact. This is more about diffusing the edges, not spreading the product everywhere. And you can see how, as it starts to blend, it starts to lift the face even more, but still looks like skin. Everything is still cohesive. Nothing is jumping out or sitting on top. And that's always the goal, for the complexion to look balanced from every angle. So this step here is one of the most important, but it's often overlooked. I'm going back in with the same brush I used for foundation, and I'm gently pressing over the transition areas. This helps to melt everything together and remove any harsh lines between products. I'm not adding anything new. I'm just using what's already there to blend everything seamlessly into the skin. This is what gives that soft, natural finish where you can't tell where one product starts and where the other ends. At this point, the complexion is pretty much complete. I'm just going to set everything in place with a little bit of powder. Off camera, I added a soft powder blush, a bit of bronzer, and just a touch of highlight to bring everything together. Now I'm locking everything in so the skin stays fresh, smooth, and long wearing throughout the day. And if you want a full breakdown of my powder routine, just let me know, and I'd love to get that to you in another video. And this is the finished complexion, everything melted, everything intentional, and it still looks like her. And that's always the standard.